Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we are talking the problem in Buffalo with some special guests, as well as other news and notes around the NHL. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Make sure that you check out our website down below because, hey, if you like this shirt right here, you can check out our shop at i80sports.com for all of your I-80 Sports needs. Hey, St. Patty's Day is behind us. You can still probably find some St. Patty's Day merch there. You can also find T-shirts there as low as $8. So if you like what we do, please support us by checking out our shop. And, of course, as always, make sure that you check us out at I80_sports NHL on Twitter, which recently we're up over 900 followers, which is nuts. I didn't even think that was going to be possible by this point in the year. And my goal of getting to 1,000 by the end of the year is that much closer. So I'm raising that goal to 1,500 by the end of the year. Let's get to 1,000. It's that road to 1,000. I'm Brian. Down below is Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing well. You know, a little bit of a slow week, I guess. Again, we have so let's just get right to it. You know, we got a little problem in a little city up to the north of us.
Which segues are cool. We've actually got some friends with us this week. Friends that we've actually kind of met before. We got three out of the four guys from the Frozen 4 podcast, Josh, Luke, and Steve. And just for a little bit of context, we actually did a podcast with them back in December of 2020, and we featured on their podcast. It was a blast of a time. Make sure that you check them out at the Frozen 4 podcast. You can check them out on all streaming platforms. But I'm going to turn it over to Luke real quick to tell you a little bit more about Frozen 4 podcast.
Yeah. Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having the three of us on. We kind of started a little over 2 years ago now. Steve ended up becoming my roommate due to some unforeseen circumstances, and I met Josh at the radio station, and we all just said, "Hey, we really love the Sabres. We really love hockey, and I've always wanted to start an actual podcast." So we started one. Invited Steve's buddy Stack on, who's not with us today, and we just started talking Sabres news, Leafs news, what's going on a little bit in the NHL. And then as of recently, we partnered with NHL News Update on Facebook, and we're rolling along doing some NHL news along with everything else now.
Really, really awesome. And like I said, you got to make sure you check these guys out at Frozen 4 Podcast. They do a really cool job, and it's fun. It's just a fun listen along the way. They make it fun. They're informative. You guys do an awesome job. And I've been looking for any excuse to actually have you guys on recently. And I wish it was under better circumstances, especially with what we're going to be talking about later. But before we roll into that, let's talk some light NHL news just to get us started for the day. So we had some waiver claims from this past week. Usually when we see, waiver moves, they're usually nothing. And we're just like, oh, that person was placed on waivers. And then, well, nothing comes of it. But this time around, we actually had a little bit of movement. So the Vancouver Canucks have claimed both Jimmy Vesey and Travis Boyd off waivers from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Pretty interesting that both of them were claimed, but we'll get to that. And the Ottawa Senators, that is, have claimed Anton Forsberg off of waivers from the Winnipeg Jets. I'm going to learn English at some point. It's going to be magical. But three guys on the move. I'll just go around the horn real quick of who do you think is the most interesting name coming off there? Josh, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, being a Sabres fan, seeing Jimmy Vesey move around like that, it's kind of interesting considering he did absolutely nothing when he was on our team. But honestly, I was kind of intrigued in Travis Boyd. I thought he might be a good addition to the Sabres. I'm assuming he's on like a league man deal, but honestly, I think he's the most intriguing name out of these waiver claims.
Agreed. Not a bad choice there. Luke, how about you?
Honestly, just seeing Jimmy Vesey move again and seeing Vancouver just become the Maple Leafs of the western part of Canada is kind of funny to me.
Yeah. Steve,
I'm not sure what this does for them, though.
Yeah, ultimately, I tend to agree. Steve, how about you?
Well, I found it interesting that Forsberg got claimed because he seems to have been moving around a lot. I think it's like his 4th or 5th team in the last 2 years, something like that. And considering that the Sabres got a 6th round pick for Jonas Johansson, who has trouble stopping beach balls at times, it just really shows how desperate this league is for goaltending. And I'd be remiss if I did not try and dunk on Jimothy Vesey, who every time he does something stupid, which is usually 3 to 4 times in a game, he drops down a weird name. So he starts at Jim, who does something stupid, goes to Jimbo, and then Jimothy. So being claimed on waivers, you're down to Jimothy, my friend.
This is very true, especially with a kid that came in with a lot of hype to this league. A lot of hype. Tom, rounding it out with you. Most interesting name.
Well, I am on the Jimmy Vesey train today, but unlike my 3 friends over here, I have positive memories of Jimmy Vesey. Jimmy Vesey was a Ranger for a little while, for about 3 seasons, and he was exactly what I thought he would be—a middle six guy, good for about 10 to 15 goals a year, and he went up to Toronto, and I guess things just didn't work out up there. I know they were wanting to play Thornton and Simmons in the top 6. I guess it didn't work out. But the thing with Vancouver is now with Pettersson being out, they're going to throw him in that middle 6 there and maybe hope he can become that 10 to 15 goal guy. And they're going to play him with JT Miller, it looks like, on the second line. So maybe that'll reignite him. He didn't play with Miller very much on the Rangers. He actually played more with Derek Stepan and Rick Nash, or, a combination of Philip Hedl and Rick Nash. He was always mostly with Rick Nash. He didn't play with Miller often, but it's a little bit of a Ranger reunion over there with VC and JT Miller. So, hopefully Vancouver's a young and upcoming team, a team that I've, sung their praises. They're playing a little bit better. I had a bad start, but, hopefully this will ignite them a little bit. It'll give them a little bit more of a jump on their offensive side there.
Yeah, it would be kind of nice to see. I think Jimmy Vesey is probably the most interesting name being claimed off the board, but I actually want to kind of riff on what Steve was saying before about Anton Forsberg. It really does kind of show how desperate teams are right now for goaltending, because we've seen most commonly goaltenders being claimed off waivers right now. I mean, just to riff on just a couple goaltenders that were claimed throughout this year. Eric Comrie was claimed twice by New Jersey from Winnipeg, and then he went back to Winnipeg. And Anton Forsberg has been twice. Alex Stalock a couple weeks ago, which that was a surprising name that moved as well. It really does show that teams are hurting for goaltending right now. And I think that's probably one of the more interesting names, especially with how hurt Ottawa is for goaltending at the moment. So be interesting to monitor going forward. Speaking of monitoring going forward, we don't have a lot of news on this update, unfortunately, but we're just going to use it as a blanket statement right now. This is actually kind of breaking-ish news. The Edmonton Oilers game versus the Montreal Canadiens has been postponed tonight. It does seem to be COVID-19 related. This is actually the first COVID-related postponement in the Canadian division. So this is going to be interesting to kind of monitor going forward. We don't have any more update, and we're not really going to talk about it right now just because it is so fresh. It is so new. But hopefully anybody who is affected can recover quickly from this in general. Yeah, English language, again, amazing with me. But the real reason why we have brought the Frozen 4 podcast on today, because you guys are aficionados on Buffalo, and it would not be right for Tom and I to just trash on the Buffalo Sabres without, some local fans to actually defend it, especially guys who know what they're talking about. So it is time to get into main content for today. The problem in Buffalo, because it's more than the elephant in the room at this point. So some context on how Buffalo has been doing lately. So their record right now is 6-19-4, which is good for 16 points, which is a little rough to say the least. They are last in the East Division, and they're one of the bottom teams in the NHL. Actually, a local Buffalo newspaper actually ranked them 32 out of 31 teams because they felt that the Seattle Kraken were a better team at the current moment, even though they have not even played a single game.
That wasn't just any Buffalo newspaper. That was the Buffalo News, like the big one in Buffalo. Like it wasn't like a small one in like one of the suburbs. It was like the one.
It makes it even worse in that case. So some news of what has happened in Buffalo lately, probably the most notable from this past week that may, be to the rejoice of Buffalo fans. Former head coach Ralph Kruger was fired this past week. He seemed to be one of the scapegoats for this season's current failures, though I'll certainly let you guys kind of elaborate on that, on what you feel from that. Was it the right move? Was it the right time for the move? Did it come too late? So on and so forth. I'm certainly going to let the Frozen Four guys, take that and run with it. Some stats that are, worth noting right now for the Buffalo Sabres. They have 61 goals for. That is dead last in the league. Just for context, Connor McDavid has more points than the Buffalo Sabres do goals with 64. The Sabres have 101 goals against. That's good for 22nd in the league. Not horrible, not great, but it's also due to some untimely injuries for the Sabres, which I'll get into as well. They have a 25.68% on the power play, which is actually above average for the league. The league average is 21% right now. So power play is not doing that bad. Penalty kill is about 78% right now, which is league average. That's right at league average. Actually, a little bit above league average from what they are. Team point leaders. This is where it gets ugly, unfortunately. Sam Reinhart is in the lead with goals for the Buffalo Sabres with 11 goals. Next is Victor Olofsson with 8. Not that great. Not that great. Assists, Jack Eichel's in the lead with 16, even though he hasn't played in about 2.5 weeks at this point. Taylor Hall is next with 14. And then in the lead for points, it's a straight tie between Sam Reinhart and Victor Olofsson with 19 points. Jack Eichel is next with 18, and he has not played in a little while. The biggest complaint amongst Buffalo fans, from what it seems like, scoring amongst the highest paid players. Currently, Buffalo has invested $33 million in Jack Eichel, Taylor Hall, Jeff Skinner, and Kyle Okposo. They have combined for only 7 goals this season. It's obviously not completely, Jack Eichel's fault. He's been battling an injury from what it seems like. Speaking of injuries, Jack Eichel's currently on the mend and could be on the mend for the remainder of the season. Dylan Cousins is also currently injured. Zemgus Girgensons and Jake McCabe are also out, and it does seem to be on the longer-term side of things for at least 3 out of the 4 players besides Dylan Cousins. I'm actually not sure how long the Cousins one is.
He's actually in the lineup for tonight's game.
Oh, even better. So seems to be coming off the mend, but was certainly missing at least for a little bit of a chunk of time there.
About a week and a half.
Yeah, about a week and a half.
4 games, I think.
Still on the rough side. So what's next for Buffalo? What should their next move be? Who is to blame for the most recent issues? Do these problems run a little bit deeper? Well, this is where I'm going to turn it over to our Frozen Four guys here, our aficionados on Buffalo. Certainly Tom and I will give our opinions when they're done, but I'm going to let you guys kind of take this over. So what's the problem currently in Buffalo, guys?
Oh my gosh, where do we start? So let me paint you a word picture for how this season's gone, because we came in with high hopes, not high expectations, but high hopes. Signed Taylor Hall in the offseason, brought in some veterans like Tobias Reeder and Cody Eakin. Really thought this might be the year. Dahlin probably taking an extra step because he had that extra long offseason, put on almost 20 pounds of muscle. We thought he was going to come in and be incredible. Even with our hopes, a lot of things had to go right with this team for it to be a playoff season. That didn't happen. Everything that could go wrong, excuse me, basically went wrong. Right off the bat, before even training camp started, Eichel was shooting some pucks. Broke an effing rib. He broke a rib before training camp even starts. So that basically explains why he hasn't been scoring goals, because he can't breathe when he shoots. And you could see it even on the power play. He was deferring and passing way more than he used to. Especially last year, he was guns blazing, shooting all the time. I mean, Taylor Hall's been good, but he has been one of the most unlucky goal scorers in the entire NHL. Skinner's problem was the coach, and we'll get to that. Now, they started playing well. That's the thing. Like the first 10 or so games, all their underlying numbers were really good, but they were more unlucky than bad in most games. And they also started out playing Washington, Philly, the good teams in the division. It was rough. Then they screwed them with the New Jersey Devils situation and COVID, and they were off for 2 weeks. They have won 2 games since that. 2. And not in the last 13. It has been just from that break. And I even forgot, Zemgus Girgensons, who's supposed to be a big key role player in the bottom 6, hurt out the bat, hurt in training camp on a non-contact injury, done. So that's why Reeder's gotten a lot more playing time. Well, when they came back from the break, Risto was out even longer because he had some extra complications, and Jake McCabe, something happened to his knee going into the boards, and he's done for the year, had surgery. He was our by far best defenseman. He took such a leap forward, and seeing him go down, the whole defense deflated, and everyone's played worse since. He was a big leader, a big key on that D, and it's been rough ever since. He went down. Next game, Will Borgen, a shining light from the Amherst. He blocks a shot, breaks his arm in a first period, plays the rest of the game. They say he's day-to-day, and then has surgery like 2 days after they announce he might have an injury because, they can't tell us the truth ever. So he goes down. Risto comes back, and he's been not great. I mean, I look like McCabe's kind of making him better. Then Eichel has too many injuries. So he had the rib thing all year. He tweaked his ankle about 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks before he went out. Then he hurt his neck. And you could see it on the bench. One of the trainers touched the back of his neck, and he winced like he got shot. So he's probably done for the year. Eichel was out. Cousins got cheap shotted, so there he goes. So our center spine was a washed-up Eric Stahl, Cody Eakin, who sucks, Lazar, who should be our fourth-line center, and God knows who else. I think Sheehan was playing center. Like this, the wheels fell off. Kruger's style of offense. This is my last point, and I'll let someone else talk. Kruger's style of offense amounted to beginner level NHL style offense. This is get it up to the point and have the defense shoot it. Usually gets blocked, never gets to the net, and never generate any high danger scoring chances. Like it was might hockey, his offensive philosophy, and he was a terrible coach.
Certainly not sugarcoating it there, Steve. Luke, I think you've got a little bit of a deeper analytical look on this one. Let's turn to you on this.
Yeah, so looking at a team that brought in the people they did over the offseason, bringing in Eric Stahl on what we thought, hey, he's still been putting up 40, 50 points, even at the age that he's at. So he's on the down slope, yes, but he's going to be a solidifying center, either line 2 or line 3, depending on how Dylan Cousins comes out of training camp. That backfired. But we also brought in Taylor Hall. Okay, we got a guy that, has been a Hart Trophy winner but in the past, candidates another season. So he's, we're bringing in a guy that can put the puck in the net and knows how to get points. Put it on a line with Eichel. Hey, what can happen? Obviously, it didn't work. Went downhill. But the players we brought in reality, was a good option by Kevin Adams. And I like that Kevin Adams is willing to bring in some of these guys. However, he needs to do more. And I think a lot of it is on him not being fully ready. We don't have an assistant GM for him. So he's doing it all on his own as a first-year GM. No president of hockey operations. I don't count Kim Magula because she does not do anything for the organization. She is focused solely on the Bills. And if anyone wants to hear our rant on that and the Pagula situation, go back to a couple of our episodes from about a month ago. And Ralph Kruger is not a hockey coach. He is good at managing. Put him in a role in the front office. We should never brought him in as coach. We should have brought him in as a just mentor for somebody in the front office or under them to learn how it kind of runs in Buffalo, and then he can step his way up that way instead of bringing him in as coach. Yeah, he coached in Edmonton. Yes, it was a weaker team, but he did not do that good there. Then he went to soccer for 8 years. He was not a coach in the NHL or part of the NHL for 8 years. He was over in Europe playing soccer and coaching soccer and managing soccer. That's not going to fully translate to hockey. It's such a weird underlying thing. A lot of it's supposed to do with money in the Pagulas, and that takes up a lot of time knowing the bullshit they have done with their money. But I'm going to let Josh take over and show us the optimistic side of things going on.
Yeah, so if any of you guys have listened to our show before, you know I'm kind of the optimist, and I'll start off a little sad, and then I'll get to the optimistic side of things. So the sad parts are, like Luke said, the lack of involvement from the Pagulas is just abysmal, and it's in 10 years ago, 10 years and a month ago now, Terry Pagula said the Buffalo Sabres reason for existence was to win the Stanley Cup. And since then, they're becoming seemingly less and less interested in the team. That needs to change. I think it can, but it needs to, yesterday. Come on. But on to the optimism. The team has a lot of good pieces. Jack Eichel is not going anywhere. All these trade rumors, they're not going to happen. They aren't. Why would you trade a top 10 center in the league? All those trade rumors are coming from people around the league and the national media and everything like that. Other fan bases, Rangers fan bases, probably Devils fan bases. But that's where it's coming from. Nothing has ever come out of Buffalo saying, "Oh, let's trade Jack Eichel." No one has ever said that unless you're suburban hockey dad. That's the only people that say it. But so he's not going anywhere. You got Dylan Cousins. Casey Middlestat is turning it around. He's actually looked very well in his role. He has been playing third, fourth line minutes, and he's gone from a negative 11 goals for expected to a negative 4 goals for expected, which obviously you're still under 0, but it's better than a negative 11. And his goals against expected has gone down as well. It was, I think, 7, and now it's about 4 as well. So it's going in the right direction for Middlestat. You have Dahlin, who, yes, Kruger was not right at all for Dahlin. He did not let Dahlin do what he needed to do. But you're bringing in Dan Girardi as an assistant head coach at the interim, and I hope he stays long term. And I know Tom can attest to how well Dan Girardi played on the blue line for the Rangers for God knows how many years.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to do great with not only Dahlin, but Yoki Haru, Will Borgen, Jacob Bryson. I just think that we're very poised to head in the right direction as long as we do the right coaching hire. And Kevin Adams said in his press conference the day he fired Ralph Kruger, we're going to take as much or as little time as we need to hire this coach. It could be tomorrow. It could be in June. And I think I'm fine with that. This season's shot. I'd like them to get a coach in now so he can start implementing his systems this season and use it as kind of like an extended training camp. But you can't rush things. There's been rumors of Bruce Boudreau. There's been rumors of Nate Lehman from Providence. There's been rumors of Gerard Gallant, Claude Julien, even Rick Tocchet and Tortorella. Where is that coming from? There's odds of who's going to get the next coaching position, and those guys are up there ahead of some other clear candidates I think we should go for. But I just don't think we should be. Yes, this season sucks. It's not fun losing at all. But we've been doing it for 10 years, and that's what makes it even worse. But this season's over. You got to start looking forward to the next year. You got at least a top 3 pick, I hope, anyway, coming into this draft. You have all of this offseason. You have the trade deadline coming up. Who knows what you're going to be able to get there. You have just all of these possibilities. You have good prospects coming up. You have Eric Portillo in Michigan. You have Linus Wiesbach in Wisconsin. You have Arttu Ruotsalainen in Rochester. For whatever reason, he's still on Rochester. And you just have all these guys that are still on their way up. And I think that it's we should still be very optimistic going forward.
Yeah, and really, really good takes on the situation currently going on in Buffalo. And it's tough. Being a Devils fan myself, I've been there. I get it. Like I know. I mean, certainly you've heard for a lot longer than I have, but you know,
I mean, you guys are kind of there right now.
Well, you know, I also found it interesting. This as a stat after game 26 last year, the Devils played Buffalo, lost in Buffalo. John Hines was fired the next day. Game 26 for Buffalo, played the Devils, lost to the Devils, fired Ralph Kruger the next day. That's just eerie in general. Just eerie in general how that happens. But I guess from, you know, my standpoint looking in, and I'll get to Tom's standpoint, you know, from the outside looking in, you know, you had not expectations. I agree with Steve that you didn't have high expectations, but the expectation was, all right, they're going to be better than what they were last year. They were going to be a better team because they've got some really, really good players and interesting players, and the wheels just fell off at the wrong time. You know, just a complete trickle down of like when one thing happened, the next and the next and the next. You know, they always say, you know, whatever can go wrong and will go wrong. That's Murphy's Law. What happened to the Buffalo Sabres this year was Murphy's Law in its complete definition. And I think, honestly, if the Pagulas actually invested in the Buffalo Sabres like they have been with the Buffalo Bills right now, you'd be looking at a completely different team. And I think it is shameful that the Pagulas have not invested that time into the Sabres as they have into the Bills. And I hope that they don't micromanage the Bills like they have been doing the Sabres right now when they start losing. So that's my only hope with the Bills going forwards in that regard. Tom, what's your opinion on everything going on?
You know, it just and I hate to say it, for it to be a knock on the Sabres, but it just seems like throughout their history, they don't follow through on everything that they do. You know, now you have the Pagulas now who, you know, I'm not a football fan, but I'm going to take your guys' word for it for what they're doing with the Bills. But it sort of reminds me where they're throwing this money at Eric. I was going to say Mark Stoll. No, Eric Stoll. I'm sorry. I don't know why I say that. I guess it's the Ranger fan in me. But Eric Stoll and Taylor Hall, you know, and they're throwing all this money at these guys. And it kind of reminds me in a weird way of the Rangers back in the late 90s where you had Dave Checkich just saying, throw money at everything that comes on the market without like a clear plan in mind. And it's sort of, you know, it is a little bit of a bad management where you have a GM who doesn't have much experience. You have Ralph Kruger, who's not really a coach. He's a manager. I mean, you can't go and say that, oh, well, if you have no hockey background, you can't be a good coach. I mean, look at John Cooper. He just won a cup down in Tampa, and he was a lacrosse player who just happened to know a thing or two about hockey. But it just seems like throughout history, they've done this. You know, you had the 70s there where they had, I still say their greatest era, we had Gilbert Perreault and Danny Gare and Rick Martin, guys like that, you know. But then they went to the 80s where they finally did bring a guy in, and sort of similar now where they brought Scotty Bowman in to be their GM. But here was the problem. Scotty Bowman was only a coach in Montreal who was clamoring for the GM job and didn't get it and said, you know something, the hell with the Molsons and the hell with your beer, I'm out of here. I'm going down to Buffalo. And it didn't translate well in Buffalo. And then they actually had that free spending time in the 90s where you had guys like Pat LaFontaine. You had guys like Dale Howardchuk, Alex McGillney. But the biggest problem back then was you didn't have a number one defenseman. Your number one D was Doug Bodger of all people. So you didn't have that. Then you had where they tried to emulate what the Devils did, build from the net out, where you had the great years with Dominic Hasek. You know, I'm sure you guys remember that. You know, you had Dominic Hasek in net, but they didn't have what the Devils had. You didn't have a Scott Stevens or a Niedermayer there. You had Mike Pekka up front, was a good forward in himself, but he wasn't a Patrick Elias or a Peter Sikora, you know. So they didn't follow through with that. Then you had maybe the era that I'm sure you guys remember with that mid-2000s era where they took everybody by surprise the year after the lockout. Where you had Briere, you had Drury, you had Bonk. You were playing those guys on three separate lines. You had all the depth in the world. You just suffocated teams by the way you cycled the puck and possessed the puck. And, you know, you pushed Carolina to 7, you had injuries. Then you got in 07, and in 07, I literally thought in 07 you guys had that cup in the bag. I mean, my apologies that the Rangers faced them with some adversity in that second round and beat them. But then, you know, everybody thought that, okay, well, you know, you lost 2 times, go for it again. And then they, due to the money problems, they let Briere and Drury just walk away. So now they're sort of doing it where they're doing it like all the other teams had. You brought in 2 dynamic first-round picks, but you just didn't have a solid management team. You didn't have a solid management team to, you know, have a vision, to have a build there. And, you know, maybe that's what they need. Maybe they need somebody to assist Kevin Adams. Maybe you are it. Maybe they need to bring Kruger in as like maybe just an advisor to Kevin Adams and then bring bring in a coach, maybe Gallant, or maybe just bring in a coach like a coach down in the AHL, or a coach like, how they have in Toronto, Sheldon Keefe. Bring in a guy who's really killing it in junior hockey and bring him up to Buffalo to bring these kids along, and go along that line. And maybe it doesn't work for a couple of years, but at least, if it builds progress, you can go somewhere with it, Or maybe you do need to bring in a veteran guy like the Islanders did with Trotz. I'm not so sure. I think if you're going to keep Eichel there, you need to bring in a guy in juniors, and hopefully you can, build off of that. If Eichel goes, then maybe you do what the Islanders did after Tavares left, and you bring in a veteran guy and just do a team first thing. But, it just always seems to be with Buffalo where they do only about 80% of the work to build a contender and forget about the other 20%. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not.
No, I know what you mean, but it's a tough season for Buffalo, and certainly a tough season for Buffalo fans in general. And, I think to stay on the optimistic side, there is a lot to look forward to if you're a Buffalo fan. They're decent prospect pool. You still have one of the best centers in the entire league when he's healthy. And, as much as I can speculate in terms of a deal that could potentially be done for a guy like Jack Eichel, I don't think any team is going to realistically like what they're going to have to give up for that. And ultimately, Eichel could very well be staying in Buffalo after all is said and done. Josh, you wanted to speak.
Yeah. So, I wanted to say, Tom, you got me a little emotional there. That was like my childhood you were just describing, was just getting there and then boom, done.
Yes.
Getting there, done. But
there's a wall in my house that remembers 07 well when I threw a chair through at least 3 times again.
Yeah.
In my parents' house, actually.
But no, so I forgot a couple things in my little optimism train there. But they're talking about bringing in Jason Carmandos or somebody like whatever his name is from Pittsburgh, and him and Adams have a connection from Carolina. There's also been a slight rumor of Jim Rutherford from Pittsburgh, as he was their former GM most recently. I don't know if I'd want that, but because he seems like he's kind of getting up there and getting a little, yeah. But I wouldn't mind having Jason Carmandos in here, if that's his name. I'm sorry if it's not. I can't remember. It's something with a K, and I think his first name's Jason. But he has been in the league for a while. He's been on Carolina. He's been on Pittsburgh as a GM or as assistant GM, I should say. And I think there's a lot of hope there. And in regards to Kruger coming in as a management role type guy, I don't really want him as that anymore. Just seeing as how he's treated the media, how he's treated the players, specifically Jeff Skinner, and just how he's kind of shielded every bit of news away from the fans. I mean, obviously you can't tell everybody what's going on with Jack Eichel's injury, but you can at least say he was injured. Don't lie. When he comes out and says, no, I was, and then Kruger's like, no, he wasn't. Like, come on, we're going to believe Jack because it's his injury, and it's getting, the plot's thickening with Kyle Okposo. Tonight, Kyle Okposo, Don Granato said he's out of the lineup because he's been dealing with an injury. Why has he been playing then? Okposo's had a history with concussions where he's almost died. Why was Kruger still playing him if he's been injured? Like, that's just neglect at that point. And it sucks to see because the Pegulas waited so long to fire Kruger. Not only is he never going to probably come back in this organization, but he most likely will never be able to get another job in the NHL at any level because of just the poor decision making on his part and the poor decision making on the organization. Because if they would have fired him, say at game 6 or 7, he might have looked a little better going in as a prospective job candidate in the future, somewhere down the road at another team or something like that.
Yeah, I get that. Steve, did you want to add on top of that?
Yeah, so I have a few points while you guys were going. First, just because we're on the Kruger point, he basically gave Kevin Adams a shopping list during free agency, and Adams, being fresh on the job, he's like, okay, let me get your players. And that's why he brought in Eakin. That's why they brought in Reeder. Reeder's been okay. Eakin has been one of the worst forwards in the NHL. I would rather have Vladimir Sobotka, who is, after Kucherov cheap shot at him, has been sent to Siberia for all time. And as far as the Pegulas, like, I hate when people like, oh, they're so good with the Bills, they just can't get it right with the Sabres. No. They hired one guy. They made one good hire and got McDermott in there, and McDermott brought in his GM. And there's rumored a written agreement of you do not touch this team. Like they have it in writing.
Mm-hmm.
We are operating this team. You write checks. And they don't have that with the Sabres. So that's why when they meddle, they do the dumbest possible thing. Jason Botterill wanted to go shorter term with Jeff Skinner. The Bagulas wanted long term. Guess who has one of the worst contracts in the NHL right now? Jeff Skinner. And I love him, but he has not lived up to that. A lot of that has to do with Kruger, but still, like the contract's insane. You can go back to when they first started. They gave Ehrhoff a 10-year deal because Terry saw him play well in the 2011 Stanley Cup final against Boston. Like his contract would be ending this year. That's absurd. Absolutely absurd. And then there's the Ville Lano of it all. So there's the Blues need to just write checks and actually let them fill out the management team. I'm glad Josh brought up the guy that they're thinking about bringing in, Caprios or whatever his name is. I don't know. It's Greek to me. But he apparently was Rutherford's no, don't do this guy. And you could tell he left because Rutherford started doing wild things after he left. Like
I think that was more Mario than Rutherford.
Yeah, true. But,
I think there's something to be said about what happens when you micromanage in a lot of ways. And I think that is kind of like the key to the Pagulas in general. Like when you micromanage and also when you have, a Pagula that shouldn't even be touching hockey and probably doesn't even know how to lace a hockey skate, not many good things happen with that, to be quite honest. So, and to Steve, to hop on what you said before, because you said Jeff Skinner's got the worst contract in the league. I think that quotes Nathan Bastian from this past week for the Devils, him telling him that from the penalty box.
Second worst contract. Erik Karlsson makes $11.5 million a year.
That's fair. That's a very fair point.
Also, as a rebuttal, who's Nate Bastian? Who is he? How long has he been in the league?
That's fair.
I think who are you?
Actually, hold on. I'll look it up in a little bit, but Nate Bastian actually might have 1 or 2 more goals than Jeff Skinner this year. That would be hilarious.
He has more goals than me.
He does.
No, I'm not gonna lie though. Nate Bastian actually isn't that bad of a player. I just that's my favorite response to that whole.
Exactly. Just like, oh yeah, who is he? Oh yeah, no, a scrub bottom sixer. Yeah, that's what I thought. But anyway, and then
I make more money in this penalty box than you'll make all year, bud.
That's the best retort back.
Yeah.
I don't know if Jeff Skinner even got to really say, but I don't know. They didn't pan over to his face. They only panned over to Bastian when he said it. I just found it funny. But I think it's time to stop dumping on Buffalo for right now. I think we need to talk about some good things. This actually segues perfectly into our fan corners for this week, because as our listeners know, I'm a diehard Devils fan to my detriment. Tom is a diehard Rangers fan to his detriment. And as you guys all have heard over the past, number of minutes, Josh, Luke, and Steve are all Buffalo fans to their detriment. See, I don't get these directions right either, but so it's time to talk about maybe some good and bad things from what happened this past week from our team. Our favorite teams. I'm going to let the Frozen Four guys start. It's time to enter the Sabres sideline and see what's going on right now. So you guys talked about the bad. What were some good things that you guys saw? Luke, I'm going to get started with you. You've been ominously quiet for a little bit.
Honestly, the only thing that I see that's like making me feel a little better is Dylan Cousins is back in the lineup. Definitely brings a different style of play to this offense, even with Eichel out of the lineup. So that's really good to see him back and playing, and that he's not out long term. I just don't see too much going on right now until I see a legitimate trade from Kevin Adams. Yeah, we just traded Jonas Johansson for a 6th, but I'm not really sure what that move is going to do that really did for us, aside maybe clear some cap space in quotes.
I hear you on that.
I mean, now we can see the immortal Justin Tokarski backing up Hutton. But honestly, I think you're shortchanging the Sabres. They have had some positives in this season. Cousins has been an absolute revelation being his second year after being drafted. He is absolutely going to be a fantastic hockey player for a lot of years in this league. There's nothing in his game is weak. He's good offensively, good defensively. He's responsible, and he fights for that puck like nobody's business. And I love to see it. Will Borgen looks like a modern day Jay McKee. And he was one of my favorite defensemen of all time. And I just love the way Borgen plays. I hope his surgery went well and he's going to recover for next year because this season's lost. So who cares? Allmark took a step and really played well. He had a few shaky games, but in his defense, he lost his dad during the season. So, and he couldn't leave to go see him because he was back in Sweden. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And he had some absolute gems before he got hurt. And also Jacob Bryson, another defenseman, he's what the analytics people call high event king. A lot of things happen against him, but he is someone who can actually take the puck from the D zone, make moves around guys, skate by them, and get it into the offensive zone. And it's at least fun. At this point, just make the games fun. I'd take Ted Nolan style coaching at this point. It's a lost season. Make it fun.
You want to know what's about to make this Sabres-Rangers game fun? Carter Hutton just left the game because he probably just ripped his knee off of his leg because somebody decked him into the net. So now Dustin Tokarski is playing.
Hey, I'm a Ranger
fan. Why do I talk?
I love Tokarski. Those memories of 2014 ring well in my head in that Montreal series.
2014.
Well,
they were in high school in 2014.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other thing.
Hey, he made a save.
One thing I want to bring back to the optimism and what we need to see happen from Kevin Adams and the organization. Sam Reinhart needs to be signed long term.
Yes.
There's not a doubt in my mind. Sam Reinhart has been the best player on this Sabres team this entire season. Him and Dylan Cousins have been the best two players on this team.
And Reinhart has been consistent for years, but no one sees it because it's either, oh, they're bad, and Reinhart just stands out a little bit, or, oh, look at Jack Eichel. And I love Eichel, don't get me wrong, but Reinhart deserves credit where it's due. And
Reinhart's not flashy. That's the knock on him. He's not flashy. He's incredibly skilled, but he thinks at such a high level that he's always in the right spot, and he makes everyone around him better.
Yeah. So a couple good things that I had. They got fans back in the arena on Thursday night. They had the Hockey Fights Cancer night, and they did a really good job. They had a very good few presentations. Marty Biron and Brian Duff, hats off to them. They did a very good job in the pregame, intermissions, and postgame of just including some sort of cancer sucks story and let's kick cancer's ass kind of thing, where every time it started out sad and it was a good story at the end. You know what I'm saying? Just one of those feel good stories every intermission, which was awesome. But I'm very happy to see Cousins back in the lineup. I think that's going to be really good for him. So I'm still I like watching the games. That's the other thing is I'm not saying I'll never watch these games again. I'm still happy to watch. It's still Sabres hockey. It's still hockey in general. So, and Tokarski made another save.
I forgot to mention probably the biggest positive from this season. Their jerseys are nice.
Oh yeah,
that is true. That is true.
Those are some.
If you're gonna suck, at least have the jerseys look good.
At least be in style while you do it. And yeah, that's true. They are
not winning. That's losing with style.
Exactly. But like I said, I think we've dumped on the Sabres long enough. Let's see what Tom's thoughts from the Rangers this week. He's probably got some more positives than he does negatives. Tom doesn't have to be pissed this week. Makes me sad a little bit, but you know what? It's time to enter Tom's Rangers realm. What happened with the Rangers this week, Tom?
Well, Mika Zibanejad is back. 6-point night against the Flyers on St. Patrick's Day in that 9-0 drubbing. And then I swear to God, some way, somehow, I think Mark Messier possessed his body Saturday night because that game winner he scored against DC was like a vintage Mark Messier goal, insert a year from 1980 to 1997 when he was an elite center. That was a vintage Mark Messier style goal. So Mika is back. Sorry, guys, we're not going to trade him for Eichel. I don't think we were ever going to trade him for Eichel, but you guys can't have him anymore. He's staying put. I guess some other positives. Unfortunately, COVID has ransacked this team a little bit. We have our whole coaching staff out with COVID now. We have Chris Knobloch behind the bench, head coach of the Hartford Wolfpack, a guy I really never knew much about until after Wednesday night. I was sitting home Thursday night, randomly looked him up. Had 4 straight 50-win seasons in the Ontario Hockey League with the Erie Otters. Obviously, he had Connor McDavid, I believe 1 or 2 of them. But I've never been pro David Quinn, never been anti David Quinn. But all I'm saying is this: if you look at the resumes side by side, it seems like Knobloch's got a better resume than David Quinn. He does. It's just fact. I'm not looking to start any problems or start any trouble here, but it just seems like his resume is better than David Quinn's. That game down in D.C. Friday night wasn't the greatest. They played well most of the game. They just couldn't seem to put the puck in the net to get a bigger lead. And, well, when you leave Ovechkin in front 2 times, stranger things will happen. Not mad about it. Youngest team in the league. Should Lindgren have had him on the second one? Yes, but you know what you learn from it. You learn from the youngest team in the league. You learn from your mistakes. And I guess just to close up, unfortunately, we have Brett Howden out now in COVID protocol with Phil DiGiuseppe, who's still been in COVID protocol. The unfortunate part about COVID, too, is we had Capo Caco out with it for a few weeks there. And I read today that, unfortunately, he's feeling some symptoms of it still. He still feels a little weak from it. And maybe that's what was happening with Zibanejad early on in the season. All I can do is hope, it's out of Caco sooner rather than later, because right before he went into COVID protocol, he was looking like one of our best players out there, was carrying the play, was running people over, was being kind of that finished power forward that we thought he would be. I'm not giving up on him yet, nor should anybody else. And for anybody that calls him a bust, think twice before you say it. The kid's 20 years old. It's unique circumstances his first 2 seasons. And I mean, hey, if Nathan McKinnon was a bust, then he would be playing somewhere else. It took him 4 years to find his game out there in Colorado. It took about 4 years for Ratman to find his game, and now look what they're doing. So, leave Kako alone. Hopefully he comes back from it, and hopefully he comes back fresh. One more thing before I turn it over to you, Brian. I've heard that Vitaly Kravtsov will be on the ice in practice this week. So we may see him this weekend in a Rangers uniform for the first time. Fingers crossed. Knock on wood. Over to you, Brian.
Would be really cool to see the Russian wrecking ball on the ice for the Rangers, and wrecking ball indeed. I mean, I've watched some highlights of the dude, and he's just a solid brick wall. That'd be really, really cool to watch Kravtsov, and that's just coming from a Devils fan. But I guess it's more so time to talk about my favorite team and just talk about some Devils, which Tom had mentioned before. They're one of the youngest teams in the league, meaning the Rangers. But now we're going to get to the true youngest team in the league because, we've got some young guns out for the Devils that did really, really well this week. I was dreading this week. Last episode, I was talking about how the Devils were entering a 3-game set with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I was dreading it the entire time, but took 2 out of 3, and I was pleasantly surprised by that. The Devils actually starting to look like what they looked like pre-COVID. Sorry again, Buffalo fans. But sorry again for the COVID. We didn't mean to give it to you.
You best be, but I pinned that more on the league than the Devils.
Oh yeah, no, the league. It was all on the league in that one. Now,
they almost did it to him again with the Bruins.
That's true. It's true. They almost did it again, but thank God, nothing happened there, which was good.
It's like Home Alone 2. We did it again.
Exactly. It's like, no. Will Butcher went down with it. It's just like, why didn't you catch it before? But it happens. But I really liked what I saw this week from the Devils. Much stronger showing. Yanni Kuokkanen has been very impressive of late. He's been, making some elite level passes in general. He's been creating space organically. And that's that big step forward for him as, a mainstay on this Devils team. He's been looking very, very good as of late. I really also liked how Mackenzie Blackwood bounced back this week. His movements are getting quicker. He's looking sharper, and it looks like he's finally getting back into the swing of things, really kind of kicking any of that, post-COVID rust that he had coming out of having COVID. That being said, I feel a lot more confident in how Scott Wedgwood looks now. I can honestly say I'd be very happy seeing him remain the backup going forward because he has played some really, really good games. He stood on his head in a lot of situations and kept the Devils in really close situations. And he's, like I've said in previous weeks, he's been the definition of work ethic. He has worked his butt off since training camp. He earned the backup spot when a lot of guys thought that maybe he was just going to be a temporary fix. And maybe he still is for this season. But, it's looking more and more likely that he's here to stay. Maybe you try to expose Aaron Dell for the expansion draft after this year, though there might be a more, lucrative name out there for the expansion draft for Seattle. Maybe a guy like PK Subban for later. But, see what happens as time goes on. But I'm pleasantly surprised that I'm not disappointed by the Devils this week. And coming into this week, I mean, I'll keep my expectations low, but at the same time, I'm happy with how the Devils look. Hopefully they can maintain that form. But let's dive into some general NHL weekly thoughts. It's just some things that we wanted to highlight this week. I'll go quick around the horn on this one. Josh, what was something that you wanted to highlight real quick in the NHL from this past week?
Yeah, so as our listeners, if you guys are listening in, will know, we each do our own divisions on our podcast now. So I cover the Central Division, and one of the games was an absolute highlight reel. The Preds and the Stars, a very surprising game to be the highlight reel of the division because those two teams are the bottom feeders in the Central. But, I mean, you go to 4-3 in a shootout, and you had Philip Forsberg flipping the puck over Miro Heiskanen, hits it up into the air, hits it over Heiskanen, goes around him, collects it, almost does a one-handed tuck on Khudobin. And then later on in the game, John Klingberg receives the pass behind him, pulls it between his legs, sets up at the point, just absolute ripper from the point, and puts it top corner. And it's like, who are these teams? Where are they coming from? And it's nothing. Like, it's crazy. I don't understand where these teams are getting this talent from. But I mean, maybe Phil Forsberg is trying to show off some stuff before the deadline and maybe get the heck out of Nashville. But it looked like a really good game, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Definitely, and I saw that highlight, and my eyes widened at that one too. Luke, what was something that you highlighted from this past week?
Like Josh said, we on the post before we each highlighted a division, and I've been focusing on the Honda West division, and all I can really say is Colorado and Vegas are just rolling. It is their division, and they're just going to keep rolling along. Minnesota's right there because of Kirill Kaprizov. Watch those games because he's been unreal for them, and I've enjoyed watching some of the Minnesota games recently just to watch Kirill play.
Kirill the thrill.
He really isn't. But like I said, Vegas, Colorado, it's their division.
Yeah, and I actually got to put a feather in my cap on this one when Tom and I did our predictions for end of the season awards. Kaprizov was my Calder choice, so see him keep that rolling. Let's go.
It's easy to pick the 26-year-old.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. Tom, highlight from you, bro.
I'm
Tom.
Sorry.
I'm
sorry. I didn't hear you at first. Well,
sorry.
I gotta say, I alluded to something maybe a few weeks ago with Florida and Tampa, and at the time they were 1-2. They were 1-2 in the league, and I said, "Wow, never in my life did I think that would happen." And obviously, as the weeks went by, things changed. Positions moved, standings changed. But yesterday, it just so happened again: 1-2 in the Central, 1-2 in the league, and man, that was a great game yesterday. It wasn't a barn burner. It was a good 5-3 hockey. It was just a good hockey game to watch. 5-3, you had nothing better to do on a Sunday afternoon. You have the number 1 and the number 2 teams in the league playing in the Sunshine State. I still never thought I'd be saying that in my life, but just a really good game yesterday between those two teams. Joel Quenneville has the Panthers playing some good hockey. John Cooper has the Bolts playing well, and they are not having a Stanley Cup hangover, and they're doing it all without Kucherov, who they're saying may be back in time for the playoffs. So will we see a repeat champion this year? I don't know, but I mean, if we see a Florida-Tampa series to decide that Central, to decide who goes to that Final Four, I think we'll have some good hockey, some really, really good hockey, and maybe a potentially a 7-game one. We shall see. But I loved that game yesterday.
Kucherov's going to magically heal up before the playoffs so he avoids the cap. they do it every year practically. Like, hey, you're great in the regular season, but why don't you just take the year off? We'll let you play in the playoffs. We'll give you a big playoff bonus and just win us a cup again. Like, that's just what they do. It's like they break his leg on purpose almost.
I mean, I don't know if you guys remember this, but do you remember Peter Forsberg back in 2002? He missed most of the season with the Avalanche, came back in time for the playoffs, and the Avalanche lost to the Red Wings in 7 in the Western Finals, but Forsberg still led the entire playoffs in scoring.
Yeah, that's just an extreme coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, Steve, what's your highlight?
Back then, they didn't have a salary cap, so that was a cap circumvention.
True.
So at least I'll give them.
That was also the year of the Detroit Super Team when they had Hull, Robitaille, Chelios. They had everything. That was the year they just bought it. Hasek, your guy who came over from Buffalo. That was the year they just bought everybody.
True.
And it just happened to work.
Steve, this segues to you. What's your highlight for this past week?
Yeah, so my highlight's a little more serious topic. So Robin Leonard got in front of some reporters in the last few days or so and talked about how he's been out with a concussion, but some people were speculating that he was out maybe in rehab again because, he has been very upfront about him struggling with mental health, bipolar, and addiction issues. And he basically just not like laid out a specific reporter, but kind of just laid it out there. It's like, I didn't want to say I had a concussion because it's my business, but I felt like I had to, just because everyone's starting to think like, oh, is he off the wagon again? He plays for Vegas. He is, it's Vegas. What happens in Vegas? And it was just, he has been such a great role model for a lot of people who do struggle with mental illness, to be able to be upfront, honest about it, and to be able to persevere, because it's sick, not weak. And a lot of people need to get that through their heads.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think a lot more people need to take mental health seriously and view it as an illness and not just something of, oh, that's just something wrong with that person. And I think that's true. There needs to be more awareness about that. My highlight for this week, just to keep it quick and short, I'm just going to pounce on what Tom said before in the Rangers realm and just say, man, that 9-0 win against the Flyers was super, super nice. Oh, man, so good. You got to mention it twice. And, I guess to kind of, reference from last week, I guess it could have been the luck of the Irish, winning on St. Paddy's Day 9-0, and certainly not the luck of the Irish for both Carter Hart and for Brian Elliott out for Philadelphia. But yeah, I'm going to agree with Tom here. Mika Zibanejad is back, and he's back in a big way, and I knew he would be, but we also knew that he wasn't going to be involved in Jack Eichel talks, because why would you trade a center for another center? That just wouldn't, why? But anyway, that's just my highlight from this past week. And before we wrap up for this week, it is time for our weekly segment, our question of the week, which usually how this rolls is I usually take to Facebook and Twitter to ask a question of what is the biggest question in the NHL this week. And if you're lucky, your question could be highlighted in a future episode of I-80 NHL, which our question this week comes from Twitter. And it's an interesting one that we can kind of riff on in this one. What is your favorite trade your favorite team ever made? And it takes a little bit of thought with this one, pretty interesting. So I'm going to let Tom start with this one, because I know Tom probably already has one already locked and loaded at this point. It's probably going to be some trade from the 80s or 90s, and it's going to be something that we're going to be like, who? What? But Tom, I'm interested to see what your answer is here.
Well, a lot of people would think me being the Rangers fan I am are going to go back to 1991 and that famous Mark Messier trade and blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to do that because it's too freaking obvious. But I am going to go back to 1997, a deal that was made at the deadline by Neil Smith. Neil Smith sent Brian Noonan and Sergei Nemchinov to the Vancouver Canucks in exchange for Russ Courtnall and Esa Tikkanen. Both of those guys were big, big components in that Rangers run in 1997 to the Eastern Conference Finals. Tikkanen more so than Courtnall. Courtnall was good with Gretzky, was a good right winger to throw with Wayne Gretzky, but Tikkanen in those playoffs played out of his mind. I'll never forget the goal against Florida where everybody in the building thought it hit the crossbar except him. He put it in off the camera, and the Rangers won it in OT. He had that other game winner against Florida in Game 5 to clinch the series. Was just got under the devil's skin in the second round and was very good against the Flyers as well, but that's where the wheels fell off. due to injuries, and all of a sudden Mark Messier got old. But I have to say that's probably my favorite one right now. There's a couple others that they've made recently, but we have to see how those pan out. Adam Fox comes to mind, but give me a couple years to analyze that one.
Good choice. Good choice overall. I'll go around the horn before I give my answer on this one. So, Josh, I'll start with you.
So mine is going to be kind of an easy one for a bunch of Sabres fans. So the Sabres on March 10th of 2003, I have the NHL Trade Tracker history pulled up here. The Sabres trade Chris Gratton and a 2004 fourth-round pick who turned out to be Liam Reddick to the Arizona Coyotes for none other than Daniel Briere and a 2004 third-round pick that turned into Andrej Sekera. Chris Gratton, while he was an amazing player for the Sabres and for the league, I might add. I mean, the guy played over 1,000 games, had 568 points. That's a pretty good career, if you ask me. In Buffalo, I can't do math, but it looks like he had about over 100 points, or he had about 40 points a season in 5 seasons in Buffalo, 4 or 5 seasons in Buffalo. So pretty good career in Buffalo. But I mean, Danny Briere, come on. He had 65 points in his first year on the Sabres. 82 games, 65 points in 2003, 2004. Next year, he had 58 points in 48 games, 95 points in 81 games in his last year on the team when they won the President's Trophy. And Andrej Sekera, another good piece for the team in our history, and now even still with the Dallas Stars. Liam Reddick's never really heard of him after the draft. So I think this is probably one of the best trades in Sabres recent history. I know there's a lot back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that my dad could probably go on and on and on about, but that's the one that sticks out to me in my personal memory and my recent memory.
Yeah, that's a really good solid choice. And to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, yeah, Chris Gratton was not a slouch. He was definitely, one of the better players in the league, one of the most serviceable players in the late 90s, early 2000s for sure. Steve, what's your choice?
All right, so I'm going to dunk on the Blackhawks a little bit and take it back to the early 90s. Had to do it to you, Luke. So if you don't know, Luke's second favorite team is the Blackhawks, and he's very obnoxious about it. So when we can dunk, we do dunk. So on August 7th, 1992, a day that shall live in infamy for the Chicago Blackhawks, they trade the Sabres acquire Dominic Hasek for Stefan Beauregard and a 93 fourth-round pick, which turned into Eric Days.
Yeah,
only one of those players is worth a darn in that entire trade, and he is the greatest goaltender of all time. The man won, 2 MVPs and 7 Vezinas in his 8 or 9 seasons with Buffalo? Absolutely unreal. Just look at his highlight reel.
Should have won a cup.
It's insane.
I mean,
he was an insane human being.
Well, he should have won a cup in Buffalo as well.
I know that.
I was a month old when that cup happened, and I don't remember any of it, but I'm still mad.
So what you're saying is it's all your fault.
Fifth grade. I was in 5th grade when that happened.
So I got two things here. Steven, we don't talk about it.
Speak for yourself, son.
And Brian, I saw your reaction to Steven saying that Dominic Hasek is the best goaltender of all time.
Okay.
I'm assuming you have a different person in mind.
There's a debate for Brodeur there.
Yeah, there's a debate for Brodeur. I mean, that being said, Dominic Hasek was one of the most fun goalies to watch, period. Hasek was otherworldly in terms of his movements. I mean, Brodeur did win a couple more cups in New Jersey than he did in Buffalo. So,
yeah. They also revolutionized the term boring hockey in front of a very Hall of Fame goaltender.
They didn't do it in 2000 and 2003. It was literally just 95.
All right. The best argument for Brodeur is his longevity over Hasek, but peak Hasek, better than anyone who's ever played goaltender in this league.
No, disagree. You're not going to hear disagreement out of me for this one. Luke, you've been looking like you were doing some research there. What's your favorite trade?
Yeah, so Josh took my initial choice. And I'm like, all right, what can I go with here? Now, this one is going to be questionable for a lot of people. He did this right afterwards and didn't let GM, management, and players get in the way of everything. This would still look very good for the way this player is playing. And it's a trade that the Sabres made in June of 2015 with the Colorado Avalanche. The Avalanche acquired Nikita Zadorov, Mikhail Grigorenko, JT Compher, and a second-round pick in return for Jamie McGinn and Ryan O'Reilly.
You had to go there.
If it weren't for the mismanagement of the Sabres, this could have gone down as a very good trade for the Buffalo Sabres.
It's one of the best of all time. Like,
one of the best of all time.
Like, O'Reilly turned into a top 20 forward in this league, and they sent him away for scraps. That's a whole other thing. But
yeah, for sure.
The trade to get him here was phenomenal. You got Zadorov, who we'd basically given up on. Grigorenko, who complete bust, a true bust.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Really, the only big piece of that was JD Compher, and yeah, he's a good, middle six forward, but it was for Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah, that's true. There's no doubt there. So my trade is going to seem underwhelming at first, but it gets funnier. And this is this would have been dunking on your friend Stack if he could have joined us. Because any chance I get to dunk on Toronto, I do, because I don't get the whole Toronto fandom. So this is going to completely dunk on them. And you probably heard this trade at some point before, but this is for sure my favorite Devils trade. And it's going to sound underwhelming until you realize who it turned into. So the Devils, back in 1991, dealt a player by the name of Tom Curvers. Yep. Dealt a player by the name of Tom Curvers to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a first-round pick. Now, at the time, Tom Curvers was a fantastic forward. Fantastic. And Toronto got him for a playoff push. That's why they gave up a first-round pick. But as, history always states, you got to be careful giving up a first-round pick. Because, for instance, when you trade a Griffin Reinhart for a first-round pick, you can end up with Matt Barzal. In this case, for the New Jersey Devils, they used that first-round pick, which ended up being number 3 overall, by the way, because Toronto was so bad the next year after they made the deal, it turned into Scott Niedermayer. So in essence, the Toronto Maple Leafs dealt Scott Niedermayer for Tom Curvers. And, oh man, that is such a, just a beautiful trade. Just a beautiful, beautiful trade. And if waiver claims, if compensation could be a thing, in terms of another favorite thing that happened with the Devils, because you don't really see stuff like this anymore. The Devils, lost Brendan Shanahan to the St. Louis Blues from arbitration, which the league said, well, you got to give something back. And they got back from that Scott Stevens. So, basically
that's pretty good.
Yeah, they almost didn't, though. There was another deal in place where they were going to get Curtis Joseph and somebody else back. And I think they rejected it, and they fought for Scott Stevens.
Ended up working out because a year later they drafted Martin Brodeur.
I know. Imagine if you had Joseph. Brodeur probably would have never played for the Devils.
That's Devils would have ended up with Trevor Kidd.
Yeah.
No joke. They would have ended up with Trevor Kidd, and it actually would have ended up being the back, literally the tandem that happened in Toronto in 2004. That's actually kind of hilarious. But anyway,
yeah,
that's my favorite trade.
The closest modern equivalent to that is the Duchesne trade, where Colorado ended up with I think the 4th overall pick from Ottawa and drafted Bowen Byram, or the Erik Karlsson trade, which is blown up in San Jose's face, and Ottawa was able to get Tim Stutzel because they got the 3rd overall pick this past year. Just want to give an honorable mention. This was my backup in case someone else took it.
Yeah.
The Sabres trade Steven Reinprecht. Good Lord, and Rhett Warner for Steve Begin and Chris Drury. whatever. Chris Drury is the one that matters in that trade. I loved Chris Drury every second of every day he was in a Sabres sweater.
One of the most underrated players. Luke, you wanted to chime in real quick on that.
One trade I wanted to mention too that I just love because yes, it helps a team that I don't like, but it also hurts a team that I don't like. When the Bruins and Maple Leafs made the trade of Andrew Raycroft for Tuukka Rask.
Oh,
and that one wasn't even like a draft pick compensation. That was just like straight up Toronto was just like, oh yeah, have Tuukka Rask. Like, are you kidding me?
Hey, Raycroft had that one great year, and he had like a 92 overall in the NHL games. So
yeah, but then again,
he was kind of good.
Toronto has not been known for great trades in the past, unfortunately. I mean,
or great goaltending as of like to the 2000s to now.
Yeah.
Then there was that one where they basically lost out on Sagan and Dougie Hamilton.
Yep.
For Phil Kessel.
Yep, I was actually just about to mention that one.
Phil Kessel trade, yeah.
And it's so unfortunate because Stack can't defend himself here, but it's okay.
Can I bring up a quick Rangers Sabres trade that's going to sting Tom a little? So on December 31st of 1987, the Rangers acquire Paul Cyr and a 1988 10th round pick that turned into Eric Fenton. And the Sabres acquire Mike Donnelly and a 1988 fifth round pick that turns into Alexander McGillney.
Yeah. You gotta understand at the time you had Phil Esposito as the GM, who was known as Trader Phil, and he had this weird analysis for doing trades where he would just like he would make it like a baseball trade. Like, if this guy scores this many points, if I can get this amount of points for a guy that has this many points, if I get two guys who score more points than this one guy does, I'll make the trade. And you also got to remember
thing.
Yeah, you also got to remember too, with the Soviet bloc restrictions at the time, there was no guarantee these guys were coming over here. Remember, if you ever watched the Red Army, I believe it. No, not the Red Army.
It was,
and they had to sneak the teeth off through Sweden and all that stuff. There was no guarantee for that back then. And at the same time, the Rangers didn't have McGillney in the '90s, but I mean, they did have Kovalev, who I was never a big fan of either. But they got a cup. They got a cup out of it. So in the '90s, so I can't get too mad.
But there's that cool documentary with Don Luce and I think Danny Gare was in it. No, Gary Meehan, about getting McGillney to America and how they were like being followed by KGB agents through Sweden. And like they were like woken up at 2 a.m, like, we have to go now or we will probably die. Or never be heard from again, sort of thing. So the whole McGillney thing is just one of the most fascinating stories in the NHL.
Oh yeah.
For sure. But that's going to do it for the question of the week. And certainly as we go forward, if you want your question highlighted, make sure to be on the lookout for whenever I post on Facebook and on Twitter through I-80 and ask your question there because, hey, you never know until you ask. But that's going to just about wrap up our episode here of I-80 NHL. What do you guys think? What's your opinion on everything going on in Buffalo? What's your opinion on everything going on in the league? Maybe even your opinion on what you think was the best team trade of all time for your favorite team. Make sure you hit up the comments down below and let us know. Join the conversation with us. And a big, big shout out to Josh, Luke, and Steve of the Frozen 4 podcast for joining us today. Guys, you guys were awesome guests today. And you guys out there need to make sure to check out the Frozen 4 podcast. You can easily find them on Spotify. Is there any other platforms that we can find you guys on, by the way?
Yeah, we're on.
So
everyone at once, quick.
So for the podcast to listen to it, we are on Anchor now. So Anchor distributes to like every podcasting site. So wherever you listen to your podcasts, we should be up there. Check out Anchor though. That's probably the quickest way to find us. Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We were on SoundCloud at a point, but I haven't had time to like backlog because Anchor doesn't post to SoundCloud. So I just have to find time to put all the new stuff with the old stuff in chronological order and do schoolwork and graduate. And yeah, so
life happens.
Life. But so yeah, that's where you can find the podcast itself. And I run the Instagram. It's called the Frozen 4 podcast on Instagram. It's the number 4, not the letter 4.
Josh, I appreciate that you basically did an Anchor ad without doing an Anchor ad.
That too. Yeah, check out Anchor too. If you ever want to start a podcast, Anchor is incredible.
Sounds
Yeah, we're also on iTunes, and the Twitter is at Frozen4Pod, and all of our personals are also within the bio on the Twitter, and we also have a Facebook, the Frozen4 Podcast. So follow us on any platform. We're posting all the time, especially on the Twitter. I'm the one that runs it. I like to have fun with it.
And check out NHL news updates on Facebook as well. Judging by their followings, most of your followers probably follow them anyway. They're a big news group basically on Facebook.
awesome. Guys, thank you so much for being our guest this week, and you guys can certainly be guests at any point in the future. You're always welcome here, especially if we're dunking on Buffalo. But it is going to just about do it. Make sure you check out our website, i80sports.com. And like I said before, if you like shirts such as these, beautiful wool knit caps such as these, you've got to make sure that you hit up our shop for all of your I80 sports needs. Easter's coming up. You could need a good Easter gift for the kiddos. You never know. You could find it there. And you got to make sure that you check us out at I80_sports NHL. I'm probably going to read a dictionary after this just to make sure I can speak the English language well. But check out our Twitter at I80_sports NHL. Join the conversation there. And also make sure you join the conversation on Facebook and on YouTube as well. But as per usual, I'm Brian. He's Tom down below. These guys over here on the Frozen 4 podcast. This has been another episode of I80 Sports NHL.